which has come up during COVID-19 time, is due to native medication and its effects on kidney. Later on, we'll talk about AKI in COVID-19, which is a hospital-based study. We had 3 elderly male patients who were diabetic and hypertensive. They were on the therapy for their comorbidities. 2 patients had history of COVID-19, which was managed accordingly. 1 patient was a known case of diabetic nephropathy. He didn't give any history of COVID infection. They had baseline creatinine ranging from 1.2 to 1.3. This history of Giloy intake for 2 to 3 months, and they got admitted with fetal edema and renal dysfunction. They had advanced renal failure at the time of presentation. We examined and evaluated them accordingly. 2 patients got dialyzed, and in view of unexplained AKI, the renal biopsy was done for all of them. So as we can see here, 1 patient finding shows that he had moderate acute tubulointerstitial nephritis, and other 2 patients who had underlying diabetic nephropathic changes, they had superimposed acute tubulointerstitial nephritis changes. So they were started on steroid for 2 weeks, and it was tapered off on OPD basis. When we followed up these patients, we found that their renal dysfunction settled out. So when we reviewed the history, we found that there was temporal association between intake of Giloy and renal dysfunction. And there was no history of any other nephrotoxic drug intake. As we know that multiple benefits are described in literature with short-term intake of Giloy. However, its long-term use may be harmful. So this intrigued us to know about the ingredients of Giloy juice. So as we can see here, out of multiple ingredients of Giloy, one of the steroidal substance named Igdason, which is an insect molting hormone. It has mineralocorticoid dependent activity, which acts via mineralocorticoid receptor via genomic pathway and non-genomic pathways. As we can see here that animal studies have shown that Igdason increases cell apoptosis in kidney, and this is how it causes renal function. It also elicits early signs of renal fibrogenesis, and this can be the reason why the diabetics are at higher risk of having AKI after Giloy dose, because they may have underlying altered intrarenal RAS activity, which may get altered after Giloy intake. So when we talk about AKI in COVID-19, we use Tedeo classification to classify AKI staging. And as we can see here, stage 1 is classified, defined whenever there is absolute increase of 0.3 milligram of deciliter per deciliter increase in creatinine over 2 days. As we can see here, multiple mechanisms of AKI in COVID-19 is described, namely hypercoagulability due to direct invasion, due to cytokine storm, and organ crosstalk and drug-induced AKI can be there in COVID-19. So as you can see here, the incidence of AKI at our center is 31.5%. As the severity of COVID infection increases, patients are prone to have AKI. And most of the cases of stage 3 AKI is seen in patients who had underlying severe COVID. So when we compare wave 1 and wave 2, we can see here that most of the patients who were from wave 2, they had AKI. And mortality was also higher in wave 2. So when we talk about renal outcome in the form of recovery of renal function, as expected, no recovery of renal function was seen most commonly in stage 3 AKI. Partial recovery was more common in stage 2 AKI. And patients who had stage 1 AKI, they showed complete recovery. The patients who had stage 3 AKI had higher mortality. And patients with mild renal failure, that is stage 1 AKI, they survived. In other words, on analysis, we can say that patients who had mild renal failure, they had 38% lesser chance of mortality as compared to patients who had stage 2 and 3 AKI. So when we analyze multiple variables, we found that multiple predictors of AKI were determined using multivariate analysis. And as we can see here, wave 2 has got 60% higher chance of AKI, of having AKI, and other variables like increasing age, female gender, increasing value of Charlson's comorbidity index, usage of oxygen therapy and ventilator, they were significantly associated with higher chance of AKI. However, Q-SOFA score, other inflammatory markers and different therapies for COVID were not statistically significant. Similarly, while determining predictors of mortality using multivariate analysis, I would like to highlight here that wave 2 has got 2.8 higher risk of mortality, and patients who didn't have AKI, they had 54% lesser chance of mortality. While other factors, variables like age and therapies were not statistically significant. So when we compared our data with previous studies, as we can see here, our mortality rate was comparable as that of UK-based data, while our mortality was lesser as compared to US-based data. So to conclude, we can say that AKI is one of the risk factors of mortality due to COVID-19 infection. Wave 2 draws the attention towards drug-induced ALN, and the rampant use of indigenous medicines, it has worried nephrologists as multiple cases of unexplained AKI were encountered. Now I would invite Dr. Abdullah to share our experience in ESRD population.
I am here to present a case of post-COVID ESRD patient with renal deficits. A 43-year-old male diabetic who was having hypertension, moderate pressure, and DCMP. He was initiated on maintenance hemodialysis in June 2020, and in the same year, August, he had severe COVID pneumonia, for which he was admitted in ICU at other center and required an IV support. Post-COVID recovery, this patient had recurrent deficits and multiple hospital admissions outside and required IVR support internally. This patient in August 2020 presented at SDPGI with similar complaint, and he was admitted in our ICU and required BiCAP support initially. So this is a Disney puzzle in an ESRD patient during COVID times. The first and foremost diagnosis that we kept was fluid overload, as this patient is an ESRD patient with very low urine output and associated history of dilated cardiomyopathy. The other three differentials that we kept in this patient were pneumonia, post-COVID lung sequelae, and pulmonary thromboembolism. Or this dyspnea may be due to combination of above factors. So we got an CT done, and it was showing bilateral ground glass opacities along with patchy consolidation, and minimal fluid effusion was there. So we started this patient on low dose steroid. We also got one echocardiography done, which was suggestive of severe LV dysfunction. However, there was no RA or RV dilation. Despite these measures, this patient did not improve and had disproportionate dyspnea. So we suspected pulmonary embolism in this patient and got one CT pulmonary angiography done, and which was showing filling defect in segmental pulmonary artery, suggestive of thrombosis. We started this patient on IV heparin, which was followed by apixaban. This patient showed symptomatic improvement over 15 days of hospital course. This patient was followed up at 2 months, and HRCT thorax was done. This patient showed clinical as well as radiological recovery. The risk factor for thromboembolism in our patient was acute illness, immobilization, CKD, and heart failure. And to this fire, COVID added as a fuel by its hyperinflammatory response, endothelial destruction, and cytokine storm. So the key points to share is that respiratory distress in an ESRD patient may be due to more than one cause present simultaneously, and the COVID has added fuel to this fire. And although our maintenance hemodialysis patient, they received heparin during dialysis, still thromboembolism should be suspected in a COVID recovered patient who are persistently hypoxic. Next, my colleague Dr. Durgesh will share our experience with maintenance hemodialysis patient.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Talking about maintenance hemodialysis patients, they represent a vulnerable cohort, for they have to visit hemodialysis unit for their scheduled sessions, which makes them prone to acquire infection from fellow patients as well as healthcare workers. They have poor immune status due to uremia per se, and also they mount poor T-cell response against infection. And they have a high COVID-related mortality, which is reported to be around 50 to 30% in various studies, which might be contributed by the factor that they have high prevalence of diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. In wave 1, 190 maintenance hemodialysis patients got admitted in RCH, out of which 92 patients were of our dialysis unit. In wave 2, however, 102 hemodialysis patients got COVID infection, but only 31 of them were able to get hospitalized during the wave 2. We provided round-the-clock hemodialysis services in RCH, and over a period of 14 months, we gave over more than 2,000 sessions of hemodialysis. At the outset of the pandemic itself, we adopted universal precautions as per WHO guidelines and implemented fortnightly RT-PCR testing for our maintenance hemodialysis patient as per the institute protocol. Analyzing the effectiveness of this strategy, we subjected 273 maintenance hemodialysis patients for fortnightly COVID-19 testing by RT-PCR over a period of 3 months. And we detected that 55 patients became COVID positive by RT-PCR, out of which 89% were asymptomatic. Analyzing this data using a susceptible infection removed modeling, using an R0 value of 2.2, we can see that the number of observed positive cases was significantly lower than the expected number of positive cases. The study later got published with the conclusion that this strategy detected 89% of asymptomatic patients and that it is effective in preventing person-to-person transmission in dialysis units. The second wave hit us hard, and considering the community spread, we molded our strategy accordingly, and we withheld the fortnightly screening, thereby making room for asymptomatic ESRD patient in our dialysis unit. We also made provision for open dialysis at the Rajdhani COVID hospital for asymptomatic COVID patients, and saving beds for other critical patients and ensuring that these patients do not miss their schedule. Provided round-the-clock teleconsultation services to these patients. Talking about the outcomes in maintenance hemodialysis patient with symptomatic COVID illness, we reported a mortality of 60%, and that the patient with severe COVID illness had a higher mortality. This was a multi-center data from 11 hemodialysis units, including ours, which was done over a period of 5 months, which included 263 patients, and the reported mortality was 13.3%, and factors which predicted mortality was use of central venous catheter as dialysis and severity of COVID illness. Comparing the mortality data with other multi-center data from various countries, the mortality rates was almost comparable. Remdesivir was the antiviral agent of choice in the treatment of COVID-19 illness. However, its use was limited in ESRD population. We were one of the first who to use remdesivir in ESRD population, and we treated 66 patients with remdesivir and observed that this drug can be safely used in this group of patients. We assessed for the seroconversion after primary infection in our hemodialysis unit. Detecting 204 patients of our unit, out of which 128 never had history of COVID, and out of which 76 were COVID positive. And we measured anti-spike antibodies and found that their asymptomatic conversion rate was 4.7%. And while in patients who recovered from COVID, the seroconversion rate was 55.2%. The seroconversion rates were higher with more severe disease, which was statistically significant. Comparing the seroconversion data with other studies, although we reported a lower seropositive rate, which this could be explained by the fact that the patient on maintenance hemodialysis doesn't mount a predictable response after a primary infection. So considering the variable immune response among the maintenance hemodialysis patient and considering high mortality rate, it has been advocated to vaccinate this cohort on priority basis. The majority of our dialysis cohort has been vaccinated, and we plan to study the immune response against the available vaccines and other parameters prospectively. Concluding, maintenance hemodialysis patient remains at high risk population for in view of high COVID-related mortality and morbidity. The timely implementation of the screening, testing, and isolation strategies can limit the spread of infection in hemodialysis units. And given the uncertain immune response against primary infection and vaccination, this cohort should be vaccinated on priority basis. Now, I would like to request Dr. Jay Kumar, who will share our experience in transplant population during the COVID era.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Durgesh. Our center is one of the large volume renal transplant centers in the country. And here we present our experience in COVID-19 and renal transplantation. We begin our discussion with the patient's battle with COVID-19 and its sequelae. This is a 44-year-old gentleman who had hypertension and chronic interstitial nephritis since 2007. And in 2017, he became dialysis dependent. After
dialysis vintage of 2 years, and in between sustaining a life-threatening form of tuberculosis, Watt's spine, from which he rallied around and recovered. In November 2019, he underwent the more immunologically challenging ABO-incompatible transplantation with spousal donor. He had excellent graft function with a baseline creatinine of 0.6 and did very well for the next 1.5 years without any admissions, and was maintained on triple immunosuppression. Until COVID hit him hard in May 2021, he had severe COVID pneumonia and was admitted in an ICU for 2 weeks. He required an NIV and had high inflammatory markers. We managed his immunosuppression, stopped his MMF, gave IV methylprednisolone, and reduced his CNI, the tacrolimus, reduced it by 50%. With IV remdesivir, anticoagulation, and antibiotics as per protocol, the patient was managed under our supervision in an ICU elsewhere. He recovered and was discharged from there. This was the imaging at his index admission. He had ARDS and had extensive ground glassing with consolidation with a CD severity score of 17. After discharge, the patient was at home for 6 weeks until one day he presented to us with cough, dyspnea, and altered sensorium for 3 days. How was he in the intervening period? He had severe disability. The EQ5D score, which is developed by the Europol group, is a validated tool for assessment of disability in transplant patients. It includes 5 components: mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain, and anxiety, depression. He had a score of 65 out of 100, which is nothing but the average of the above scores, all of which were low for this patient. The patient also had significant weight loss, and after this period, he presented to us in septic shock with a QSOFA of 3. This clinical picture shows that he had severe tongue ulceration with exposure of the papilla. The patient was admitted in our ICU and was evaluated. After stabilization, he underwent a HRCT thorax, which showed he had thick-walled irregular cavitary lesions with satellite nodules suggestive of fungal pneumonia. We, however, could not do a biopsy of either the tongue lesion or the lung nodule in view of thrombocytopenia. The sputum cultures were not of any yield. We treated him with IV amphotericin and posaconazole. With prompt correction of electrolyte imbalance and dehydration, patient improved over the next 2 weeks. On follow-up at 24 weeks, patient's oral ulcers had significantly improved. He had gained weight of 8 kgs. His graft function was stable throughout, and his MMF has been restarted. And the disability scores at follow-up was 98, which is he was showing a remarkable improvement. The HRCT thorax, which was done, showed architectural distortion and patchy fibrotic opacities suggestive of post-COVID sequelae. Similar to this patient, we had also noticed after wave 1, multiple other patients had presented like this. And so we studied the graft outcomes as well as the disability scores of these patients at a minimum 3-month follow-up. And what we found was patients who had severe COVID had a higher disability in the form of disability scores significantly lower on all the 5 components in comparison to if they had survived a mild to moderate COVID. To tell us more about the numbers as well as the graft and patient outcomes of our transplant part, I now invite Dr. Vamsi.
Thank you, Dr. Jayakumar. A very good morning to everyone. Management of COVID-19 renal transplant recipients is different from that of general population. As we can see, the incidence is 2 to 5 times higher than that of general population, and also they are at 5 times increased risk of severe COVID and have 10 to 20 times increased risk of mortality. Apart from this, there are certain challenges in management of COVID disease in renal transplant recipients. We have to titrate the background immunosuppression, manage the disease per se, COVID-19, management of associated comorbidities that these patients usually have, treatment-related adverse effects and drug interactions, and monitoring the disease and allograft parameters. Because of these challenges and increased risk of severity and increased risk of death in this particular cohort, universal admission was recommended by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in all transplant recipients, irrespective of stage of severity. We have 2,500 post-transplant patients under our follow-up in our center. Of these, 251 transplant patients were affected by COVID-19. Of them, 104 affected COVID-19 in first wave, and 147 were affected by COVID-19 in second wave. Overall, 58% patients were hospitalized. In wave 1, while 75% of the patients could be hospitalized, in wave 2, only 46% could be hospitalized. More than 50% in wave 2 had to be managed at home because of severe scarcity of bed during the second wave. These are the severity patterns of COVID-19 in renal post-transplant patients. Overall, as we can see, 75% had mild to moderate disease, while 24% had severe disease. The severity patterns are similar across in both wave 1 and wave 2. The graft and patient outcomes in renal transplant patients with COVID-19 were analyzed. We found that the baseline creatinine, graft dysfunction, either new onset graft dysfunction or persistent graft dysfunction after the recovery from illness are all significantly higher in severe group, and initiation of hemodialysis were also significantly higher in severe group. Overall mortality in our center was 15%, and 53% of the patients with severe COVID have succumbed. We have followed the survivors who have recovered from COVID-19, and we have analyzed and found that across around the median duration of follow-up of 8 to 9 months, we found that the readmission rate after the recovery from COVID was significantly higher in severe group. And even the post-COVID lung sequelae are also significantly higher in patients who have recovered from a severe COVID. There are three major domains in the management of COVID-19 in post-transplant patients. First, reduction of the background immunosuppression, either in the form of cessation or reduction of antimetabolites and calcineurin inhibitors, confronting the ongoing cytokine storm with increasing dose of steroids, with or without other anti-immunosuppressants like tocilizumab, tofacitinib, and IVIG, use of antivirals like remdesivir and favipiravir. First domain, that is titration of background immunosuppression. The overall practices of antimetabolite alteration and CNI alteration were similar across wave 1 and wave 2. The second domain is to overcome the cytokine storm by increasing the steroids. Overall, steroids were increased in 72% of the transplant population with COVID-19. By the time we have reached wave 2, with the increasing evidence of benefit of the steroids, the use of steroids have increased, and in our patients, steroids were increased in 96% of patients in wave 2 compared to wave 1, which is significantly higher. And IV methylprednisolone was also used in 22% of patients in wave 2. The second strategy to overcome the cytokine storm is to use other anti-inflammatory and immunomodulatory agents. As we can see here, many patients in wave 1 have received ivermectin and azithromycin, while use of tocilizumab, tofacitinib, and IVIG is confined to wave 2. As we can see here, 12 patients with severe COVID in wave 2 have received IVIG. And the strategy of using IVIG in this particular cohort is with COVID is because of its immunomodulatory action, it has the potential to protect the patient against the infection, as well as it has got protective effect on the graft because we have already decreased the background immunosuppression. We have noticed that 6 of these 12 patients who have received IVIG have actually improved from severe COVID. Use of antivirals like remdesivir, we have got remdesivir in post-transplant patients. We have used in patients with moderate to severe COVID. If they had presented within 7 to 10 days of onset of illness. 45% in wave 1 have received remdesivir, while only 27% in wave 2 have received remdesivir. The decreased use of remdesivir in wave 2 is because of the fact that many of the patients in wave 2 had to be managed at home, and also because of scarcity of the drug. ICU care in renal transplant recipients with COVID-19, while 26% of the patients in wave 1 could be given ICU care, only 14% could be given ICU care in wave 2. Importantly, 9% of the patients who have got severe disease could not be given ICU care because of severe scarcity of beds. Despite of this, the overall mortality was similar across wave 1 and wave 2, as it was not found to be statistically significant. The factors predicting mortality were analyzed. We found that the cadaveric renal transplant recipients, presence of an underlying diabetes or coronary artery disease, past history of fungal pneumonia, presence of rejection within past 1 year, presence of dyspnea or acute graft dysfunction at presentation were all associated with increased risk of death in COVID-19 in renal transplant patients. We have compared the clinical profile and outcomes with that of other centers in India. The baseline characteristics were overall similar. We found that our center had a slightly higher increased severe cases. 58% of the patients could be hospitalized, and of them 34% could be given were given ICU care, and the overall mortality was similar between our center and rest of the centers in India. We have followed the survivors for a 12-month for over a 12-month period to see the long-term sequelae. We found that the fungal infection rate, urinary tract infections, lung sequelae, and rejection rates were all significantly higher in wave 2 in patients who have recovered from wave 2 compared to wave 1. Vaccination in renal transplant recipients is one of the potential strategies to protect this particular cohort. According to the note of 2021 guidelines, all renal transplant recipients with or without prior COVID-19 infection are to be vaccinated, and they have to be vaccinated at least 2 weeks prior to transplant or 1 to 6 months post-transplant, 4 to 12 weeks after the recovery from COVID illness, or 4 weeks after recovery from any febrile illness. Regarding the efficacy of vaccine in renal transplant recipients, this is a Western data which found that the seroconversion rates in post-transplant patients are very poor when compared to general population. But this is against mRNA vaccines. So what is the India data? We have done a cross-sectional study in our center with 222 renal transplant recipients. Of them, 61 were vaccinated and 161 were not vaccinated. The three important points I would like to emphasize here is, among the patients who are not vaccinated with no prior infection, the seroconversion rate was 83%, which means that the asymptomatic infection was seen in 83% of renal transplant recipients. And among the patients who were vaccinated with no prior infection, the seroconversion rate is 70%, which means that the vaccine-induced seroconversion is seen in 70%, which is similar to that of general population. And more importantly, even though the patients who were not vaccinated have a seroconversion because of prior asymptomatic or symptomatic infection, the overall antibody titer is significantly higher in patients who were vaccinated compared to not vaccinated individuals. We also found that the effectiveness of Covaxin or Covishield in this particular cohort is similar. Both the vaccines have yielded similar seroconversion rates and similar antibody titers. So to sum up, the overall outcomes and mortality in COVID in renal transplant recipients is comparable to that of other centers of India, despite a higher period that we have observed in our center. Vaccination in renal transplant recipients, seroconversion rates are on par with that of general population. Similar efficacy was seen either with Covaxin or Covishield, at least in our transplant population. There is significantly higher antibody titers among vaccinated individuals. This is regarding the outcomes of COVID in renal transplant recipients. I would like to invite next speaker, Dr. Basuraj, to speak on the impact of lockdown on non-COVID transplant services.
Thank you, Dr. Vamshi. So after seeing how COVID-19 directly affected our renal transplant patients, now we'll discuss impact of disruption of transplant follow-up services on non-COVID renal transplant patients. So the cornerstone of management of all renal transplant patients is meticulous graft surveillance with regular follow-ups. But because of lockdown, routine transplant OPDs were closed, and as the laboratories were not functioning, so patient could not monitor their CNI drug levels, and the accessibility of subsidized immunosuppressant medications were also hampered. So we compared patients admitted for 6 months duration during COVID with that of the patients admitted prior to COVID time. So although number of patients and number of admitted patients were low, but the proportion of kidney transplant recipients definitely increased during COVID time than that of the patients admitted during prior to COVID. And after excluding post-renal transplants who were dialysis dependent, we compared total number of 212 patients who admitted during COVID with that of the 302 patients who admitted prior to COVID. So how this disruption of transplant follow-up services affected our patients? So there was a drastic change in type of admission pattern, as the more number of patients admitted for emergency indications rather than elective one. So, and more number of patients admitted with infectious causes like lower respiratory tract infection rather than asymptomatic rise in creatinine.
and more number of patients had drug non-compliance, both for CNI and MMM. And as this led to a severe graft dysfunction, leading to increased number of patients requiring hemodialysis. So now coming to how it affected our patient outcome. So the mortality and patients requiring ICU care, mechanical ventilation were also significantly higher in patients admitted during COVID time. And coming to graft outcome per se, so more number of patients lost their graft and become dialysis dependent among the patients who admitted during COVID time. So what lockdown meant for transplant population? So COVID-19 lockdown resulted in an interruption in routine renal transplant services, leading to increased emergency admissions, increased ICU admissions, increased number of patients become dialysis dependent, and increased mortality, increased severity of graft dysfunction was seen, and increased number of patients with inappropriate CNI levels. So key message from this observation was the transplant OPD services should be considered as essential services like dialysis, chemotherapy, and maternal and child health services. And we should strengthen telemedicine-based OPD and follow-up system. And importantly, availability of immunosuppression drugs should be made easier to ensure the compliance. So now conclusion of our CCR. So we observed high prevalence of AKI in COVID-19 patients and is an important risk factor for morbidity and mortality. Maintenance hemodialysis and renal transplant patients carry high risk of acquiring SARS-CoV-2 infection and had higher mortality than general population. So vaccination of this susceptible population is safe, efficacious, and is the key to prevent morbidity and mortality. The follow-up transplant services should be considered as essential services to prevent patient and graft loss. So we dedicate this presentation to all healthcare personnel involved in the care of COVID-19 patients. Thank you.